So I'm going to introduce everyone. These are Atlantic Book Award nominees. Sagama Misael-Jo, who will be joining us shortly, is the author of Moonjeej Becomes a Man and An Aboriginal Chief's Journey. He's been the district traditional chief of Mi'kmaq First Nation since 1983, appointed by the late Grand Chief Donald Marshall. Misael-Jo is considered the spiritual chief of all the Mi'kmaq of Newfoundland and Labrador. Sheila O'Neill is from Kippens, Newfoundland and Labrador, and she's a member of Hollywood First Nation. Sheila is a drum carrier and carries many teachings passed down by respected elders. As a founding member and past president of Newfoundland Aboriginal Women's Network, NON, she's been part of a grassroots movement of empowerment of Indigenous women within the island portion of Newfoundland and Labrador. And Sheila lives in St. John's. And about the work that they're going to be talking about. In 1822, William Epps Cormack sought the expertise. Sorry, I was just interrupted by some weird audio. In 1822, William Epps Cormack sought the expertise of a guide who could lead him across Newfoundland in search of the last remaining Beothuk camps on the island. In his journals, Cormack refers to this guide only as my Indian. Now, almost 200 years later, Misael-Jo and Sheila O'Neill reclaim the story of Sylvester Joe, the Mi'kmaq guide engaged by Cormack. In a remarkable feat of historical fiction, My Indian follows Sylvester Joe from his birth in what is now known as Mi'kmaq First Nation, and early life in his community to his journey across the island with Cormack. But will Sylvester Joe lead Cormack to the Beothuk, or will he protect the Beothuk and lead his colonial explorer away? In rewriting the narrative of Cormack's journey from the perspective of his Mi'kmaq guide, My Indian reclaims Sylvester Joe's identity. My Indian is nominated for the 2022 Best Atlantic Published Book Award. Rebecca Thomas is a Mi'kmaq woman registered with Lennox Island First Nation. She is the daughter of a residential school survivor, an unrelenting advocate for her community. She's a published poet and was the Halifax Poet Laureate from 2016 to 2018. She lives in Ukjibuktuk, Mi'kma'ki. Swift Fox All Along is nominated for the Anne Connor Brymer Award for Atlantic Canadian Children's Literature. When Swift Fox's father picks her up to go visit her aunties, uncles, and cousins, her belly is already full of butterflies. And when he tells her that today is the day that she'll learn how to be Mi'kmaq, the butterflies grow even bigger. Though her father reassures her that Mi'kmaq is who she is from her eyes to her toes, Swift Fox doesn't understand what that means. Her family welcomes her with smiles and hugs, but when it's time to smudge and everyone else knows how, Swift Fox feels even more like she doesn't belong. Then she meets her cousin Sully and realizes that she's not the only one who's unsure, and she may even be the one to teach him something about what being Mi'kmaq means. Based on the author's own experience, with striking illustrations by Maya McKibben, Swift Fox All Along is a poignant story about identity and belonging that is at once personal and universally resonant. Jody Callahan is from the Listigouge Mi'kmaq First Nation in Gaspé-Gawagi, Quebec. She started writing stories when she was 8 years old and has always been drawn to storytelling. She's found writing to be the best way to connect to her history and her culture. Jody currently resides in northern New Brunswick with her husband, child, and pets. When she's not teaching, she's very slowly chipping away at her Master's of Education degree from UNB and dreaming up stories she will one day write. The Train is nominated for the Anne Connor Brymer Award for Atlantic Canadian Children's Literature. Ashley meets her great uncle by the old train tracks near their community in Nova Scotia. Ashley sees his sadness, and Uncle tells her of the day years ago when he and the other children from their community were told to board the train before being taken to residential school where their lives were changed forever. They weren't allowed to speak Mi'kmaq and were punished if they did. There was no one to give them love and hugs and comfort. Uncle also tells Ashley how happy she and her sister make him. They are what give him hope. Ashley promises to wait with her uncle by the train tracks in remembrance of what was lost. All of these nominations are well deserved, so congratulations to everyone who's here, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us this evening. So I think I'm gonna start. I'll go backwards in the order, give more time for Chief Joe. I'm gonna start with Jody, and I think that the overarching question is really about the importance of telling our own stories. And so if each of you could think about that in what the genesis was for you to create these works to share, how you came about or what the idea came from, and then perhaps what you hope the reception is, and you hope that what happens after this, if this is a piece of reclaiming some of our stories. So we'll start with Jody.
First of all, thank you for having me tonight. I wrote the train. I actually wrote the train 10 years ago for a community, or over 10 years ago, for a community writing contest. My community has this awesome writing contest that encourages storytelling, and they have different categories in it. Anyway, the train won, and I kind of sat on it for a long time. I never really thought I could publish it outside of my community. It was actually seeing other Indigenous writers do that inspired me to submit it to publishers. So the fact that I see other Indigenous people sharing stories and telling stories and publishing books is what really encouraged me to share the train with people. So sharing our stories and telling our own stories is, and seeing other Indigenous people do that is essentially why I'm here tonight. So it's everything to me. It's just, it's always been a really important part of my story as a writer.
That's great. Thank you. And now we'll go to Rebecca.
Hi, Nindeloisi Rebecca, Deleo Ejibuktuk Nigamagi, Watabegsi, Abequet. I just want to say my name and where I'm from. I live in Halifax, Nova Scotia. My family's from Lennox Island First Nation. And if you see me looking down a lot, it's because I'm working on like the beginnings of a new piece of beadwork, because I found that I have a hard time paying attention if I'm not doing something with my hands. So I'm not looking at my phone. I promise. I'm listening. I'm here. For me, I wrote the book that I needed as a kid. I think that, I grew up off reserve. My dad went to residential school. I grew up in an all-white town. I went to an all-white school. I had somebody in the 9th grade said they weren't going to work with an Indian. And that was the first time that I had this kind of shocking moment that, wow, people see me differently. And I didn't know that. So even though I took my time finding, who I was as a Mi'kmaq person, the world all saw me as a Native person. And so that kind of dissonance is a little jarring when you realize that people have been looking at you differently your whole life, and you didn't even look at yourself that way. So I just wrote the books that I needed, I think, to validate my experience as a kid. And, to quote, a writer, Sue Goyette, who I look up to tremendously, she says, your first books are just suitcases of home. And so I just write what I know, I suppose, and what I needed.
I like that, suitcases of home, and that it was the book you needed as a kid. So I'm going to move to Sheila, and I guess Chief isn't with us yet, but maybe you can start.
Hi, everyone. Actually, Chief is listening in through my phone, and I'm hoping that if he responds, he doesn't have the phone number yet to join in by phone. Hopefully he can hear and respond. Chief approached me at Powwow in 2017 and told me he had a project he was working on. Would I be interested? And I said, maybe, sure. And so I met him at his house, and we sat on the deck, and he said, I've got this story. It's a part of oral history. it's been passed down through the community, and I want to write it down, and I want your help. And that's the origin from my perspective.
I just want to interject something too, that both Sheila and Chief were at a documentary screening a few weeks ago at the St. John's campus of Memorial University, and because it's relevant to this conversation about retelling the narrative from the perspective of Sylvester Joe, and those of you who aren't on the island of Newfoundland may not be aware of how permeating this Cormac character is all across the island in terms of the mainstream narrative of history. And so we showed this documentary about the Beothuk, and one of the very first question, the person was jumping to get the microphone, and the very first question was, why wasn't there anything in the documentary about Cormac? And it seems like that, so this book is sort of answering to that, why do we have to continuously talk about Cormac and not about the person who took him all over the place and knew everything before he ever got there? So so now I guess I'll go back to the second part of the question about the reception. Like, how have you, I'm sure you've been, and I know more about Sheila and Chief's activities in terms of, speaking to groups and talking about the stories, but how has the reception been in terms of visiting? I don't know where you've been and carrying your books and selling them, signing them and whatnot. And I'll start again with Jody.
When the train was first self-published in my community, I remember having a few people message me on Facebook and saying that they enjoyed the story, they liked it, and then I remember being at because I'm a teacher, and I was at a PD day at our school, and one of the elementary school teachers came up to me and she said that she uses it in her classroom, and for me that was just the coolest thing to hear, that children were reading my story, because it was submitted to a community contest. I just assumed adults were reading it. And then when it eventually got published and was put out into the world, just hearing from other people and from survivors and their families and their children, their grandchildren, the reaction from them has been really beautiful and just really, I don't know, it's really surreal. It's still really real for me to have that out there and to have people reading it, and it's just been amazing. Everyone's been really lovely, and I've had really good reaction from people. So I can't say anything negative about it. It's been awesome, and people in my community, when they find out that I've published a book, like, it's cool. Someone from Listed, I mean, we have a few published authors now, but it's cool for everybody to see that, and to someone they know has a book in a store, so it's really exciting. It's really nice.
It's nice to see that, that the community is part of it. It's not, your work isn't separated from people as an individual thing, right? I think that's really amazing. Rebecca, how's reception been with yours?
For Swift Fox all along, that was certainly a very personal story, right? It was kind of my experience going back to the res for the very first time as a little kid, and what that felt like. But for me, I have had such positive feedback from like little kids, and I think that that's wonderful. I mean, Swift Fox all along has been nominated for some kind of big heavyweight awards throughout its very short published life. And my stepmom's visiting down from Ontario, and I'm not very good about talking about the awards. She goes, "Oh, you're nominated for a book award. I'm leaving on Thursday." I was like, I feel like I don't invite people because I feel like that, why would I don't feel like celebrating myself. And I know this is long-winded. I'm getting to the point, I promise. I feel like, well, if I don't win and you waste your time, or, that kind of attitude about not celebrating my work and my stories for what it is. And then I will have a friend, and a very near and dear friend of mine, and he's raising his nephew with his partner. and his nephew kind of grew up off reserve and then went back, and he sent me this text, and it was just this little thing that says, we can't get this kid to read anything, and he reads your book every night, and he says it feels like she wrote a book about me. And it's like that, like, these awards are fantastic. It's an honor to be here. But when I have like a little Mi'kmaq kid say like, I feel like she wrote this book for me, oh, the waterworks. Like, I can't, like, that's why I do this. Like, I'm very bad at celebrating myself. But when a little kid gets connected to my work and I go, this is why, not the awards, I mean, we all know that we're not going to get rich off of a publishing deal from 1 or 2 books. But when the little kids, or this Glis comes up to me and he's like, I like the book. Like, I love it. And that's the reception that I look for when I have this book out there. And then to see just all different kinds. I made a point of asking the author to put in different kinds of Mi'kmaq people. So we have Afro-Indigenous kids in this book. We've got Mi'kmaq kids who are mixed with white. So they got freckles like me, right? So like there's just different kinds of Native kids in this book too, which is really nice. So we're not also just showing this kind of stereotype. We're showing like the wide breadth of Indigenous people and imagery that's out there. And so I think that's what I get really excited about. So yes, I took a left turn in the story, but I brought it back. And so, yeah, that's been my reception. I think that's what's really wonderful.
That's really great. And especially just the engagement with young people. And, like you said, that you wrote the book you wish you had, and now little kids now have it. They have a book, right? That you didn't have, which is pretty cool.
Oh yeah, and I know I'm taking up more time, but with my other books, I'm finding my reserve did it in their school. They did the book, and then they brought me into Zoom, and I got to speak to it and answer little kid questions. And I had this little girl who looked like me. If you look at me as like a little kid, she looked like me, and she came up to the mic and she was all shy and she took down her mask and she goes, I want to know, is it scary to stand up to white people the way that you do? And then she leaned in and she's like, but I'm really glad you wrote the book. And I was like, keep it together, Thomas, keep it together. So like, yeah, it's like that stuff. Like, that's why I do the work that I do. It's really wonderful.
That's amazing. Sorry, I muted myself and then I spoke. So Sheila and Chief, how has the reception been to My Indian?
There's been a lot of interest in the schools, definitely here in the province. When Chief said some students have done book reports, these are like 10-year-old students doing independent novel study. There's also Prof at Memorial he's a geography prof teaching land-based culture, and he does a couple of courses referencing William Cormac. And without any fanfare, apparently he just trotted down to the bookstore and bought a couple of books and mentioned it was for his course. And so through some mutual geography master's students, I learned that this is what he's doing. He's using it in his course, and he wants to design curriculum specifically around it. So even at the university level, even though this is a young adult book, I'm kind of like you, Rebecca. Like the whole idea that this is being impactful is. If I had a tail, I'd be wagging it. Really, it's the best way to put it. It's pretty exciting and pretty gratifying, and I'm just thrilled.
I think it's fantastic that all of these, the access to as many people as possible is really important. And when you hear about, each of you has mentioned something about the books being in schools, and when you hear a teacher is using it, or in this case a prof as well, once that happens, you're, especially if someone's actually using it for discussion and having conversations around it, and that's part of that propelling forward, which I think is really fascinating and important. And there's such a dearth of work that's written by Indigenous peoples about our own histories, that these are, the fact that this is going to younger people is really important as well. So the third question that I have for all of you that I already mentioned is just like what happens next. So not necessarily for this one work that you're talking about tonight, but what's the what's the propulsion from this? Like if there's attention on it, are you planning to write other books in a similar style, or do other things, or do more with this one? So again, I'll start with Jody and just ask what's next.
I would love to write more books. It's something that I plan on doing. If someone will publish them, that would be amazing. The Train is a residential school story. And it, there's a lot of sadness in it. There's some hope in it as well. But for me, I really want to explore different types of stories, looking at stories that, celebrate Indigenous joy and family, and just, reflecting on my childhood growing up in Listergudge and what that meant for me, with my grandma and my mom and my sister, and exploring those types of relationships. I just want to, I guess, kind of look into more diverse stories and just explore something different. I think I wrote The Train at the right time for me. It was something I just kind of needed to get out. And but now I'm, in a different place and wanting to write different types of stories. So I really hope I get the opportunity to do that.
Excellent. Rebecca.
Yeah, I have two more kids books. One is a draft that's been sent off it's now going through the editing thing. And then I'm writing another one about, similar stuff that Jody talked about, like not all doom and gloom. I think as I'm aging as a writer, I think about, a lot of trauma that we put out there all the time, and that it can be really exhausting for like us as Indigenous people to just constantly be re-exposing ourselves to all the time. So I think about like who has a right to this kind of pain and trauma, and like why do I want to monetize it, or something like that. So I'm thinking about like a lot of like the joy that I have, and that's what I'm writing. So my draft is one about like land acknowledgements, but it's told as a narrative story. So like a little Mi'kmaq kid's in his class and they're looking at maps, and he's like, all these maps are wrong. All these names are wrong, right? And it kind of starts like that sort of story. And then I'm writing a story about like the chair that was my grandfather's chair. My grandfather did a lot of my bringing up, and I was very close with him. And like, he used to take care of me when I was really little in the chair. And then as I aged and he got sicker and started to die, like I started taking care of him. So this like story about grief, but like love. And it's told from the perspective of the chair who got to witness this beautiful relationship. And then I have grand plans of writing a romantic comedy between Native people, like a novel, like an adult novel, because I love reading romantic comedies. They're like wonderful escapism. There's always a happy ending. The problem they have to get over is usually like one fight. And so I just want like to show Native people falling in love and, make it kind of sexy, and then also just like full of humor and a happy ending. And so like I want to write that as well. So that is like on my board. You can't see out here. I just have like a wall of Post-its of like the different scenes that I want to write for that. I've never written a novel before. Children's books are very prescribed, 32 pages, like 600 words. So we'll see how that goes. But that's, I think, where I'm going. I think I just want to put more joy out there. Like we need to bear witness to all of these stories of pain and tragedy. It's really important that we don't forget them, and that we honor the people who were basically gaslit for their entire lives that it wasn't that bad, or this was for your own good, all that sort of stuff. But it's also time that we like, look, we're also really funny and we're romantic and we're super talented. Like, let's show this beauty that we have as well. And I think that's what I want to put out, more beauty. Like grieve the way that I need to grieve, but put joy and love and excellence out there as well.
Yes, yeah, it's time. It's definitely time for that. Okay, Sheila and Chief, what's happening next?
Go ahead. Oh, what's happening next for us? Are we writing any more books or any other plans?
Already started the sequel to Indian. We're 15 16,000 words into that one. And it's all fiction this one around. We're going to try and stay away from the historical part. Maybe I put a little bit in, but not much. It's not based on whole history. So Whistler's attempt to find the remaining patriotic group that's left behind these.
Yeah, so that's the plan. That one doesn't have a title yet after the some of the impact we had from the title when we chose My Indian. We haven't titled this one yet, but it'll be less controversial. We did get accused of monetizing the title, and we chose it because Cormac only referred to his guide as My Indian all the time, 27 times actually in the journal that he kept right from page 1. So we used that title to reclaim the narrative, but this one will have a different title, I think. I don't know what it's going to be yet, though.
Yeah, I remember seeing some of those comments that people had that I think hadn't read the book, or, you know, that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fortunately, people who had read the book started chiming in and explaining it. So, and that's when I stopped reading the comments.
Yeah. So I think right now it would be a good time to allow people who've been watching to ask a question. And I think we have a small group, so maybe if you want to speak, you could just raise your hand and then be called on. So Ivan has a question for everyone. How do you navigate editorial? I'll just let whoever wants to go first can start.
It really depends on which of my books that it was. I'm finding my talk was very easy. Like, I wrote the poem, I sent it off to Whitney Moran from Nimbus, and she says, this is great, just a couple of words here and there so that it flows a little bit better, that the syllables match up. With Swift Fox All Along, that editing process took like a year and a half. Mainly, like, I mean, I work full time. I was doing all these other things, like much like my master's, I would be given edits and I'm like, yeah, I'll get to these. And then 3 or 4 weeks later, my editor would be like, so how's those edits coming? And then I would do them. And then when it came to I Place You in the Fire, my poetry book, some of the things I find that I'm deeply uncomfortable, like, revisiting, and those tend to be my poems about like love, like romantic love, or love that I have for my friends. And I think that comes from the history of, like, you know, being the daughter of a residential school survivor. Like, I love yous and hugs were something, like, you know, like that comfort, that was something that was really foreign in my household. Like, I still don't like to be hugged. Like, sometimes when I have friends who are huggers and they'll hug me and I clam right up. Like, I'm not used to it. Like, ooh, I want this, but it's so foreign and uncomfortable. And so when it came to editing those poems about me kind of just, you know, putting all of myself out there in a hot mess, when it came to those ones, I would like select all the edits and I would go approve all, because I didn't want to read the comments on those poems. But when it comes to the poems about missing and murdered Indigenous women, or like status cards, or like a lot of the stuff that's really been problematic in our communities, those ones I felt really deeply about. And there would be some ones where I have one in here called Pennies, about missing and murdered Indigenous women, and it's framed up as an advertisement for the Hudson Bay Company. Like, I highlighted all of those and I just replied, no, I'm not changing this poem is perfect and I'm not changing it. So it just really depends, I think, on like the process, what work you're working on. But I can only imagine the agony that the editing process of a novel that I will eventually write will be. I'm a little nervous about that, but I feel like I'm just going to dive in, you know, and do it. If that answers Ivan's question. I think it just depends on the work and how you feel about the content and how personal it is. So I think there's a lot that goes into it.
Jody.
I probably have the least amount of experience because I only have one book, but the editing process was surprisingly really smooth. I don't know. I had I worked with I published through Second Story Press, and yeah, my editor and I had a really good rapport, and we were kind of on the same page right away. one thing that was interesting to me, because she was a non-Indigenous person, there was like a lot of nuances I had to explain, especially with the Mi'kmaq words I used and what they meant, and in what context they were being used. And what, like, for example, like I use the word deuce a lot, and that's just because growing up, like every elder or every great uncle, auntie, whatever, they all call me deuce, right? Which is like a slang word for daughter. It's short for entus. And like just explaining those words, what does that mean, and is this person's daughter? I thought it was her uncle. Like, why is he calling her daughter? And just kind of explaining those little nuances that we have with our language and our community. So that was like kind of the only thing we had back and forth on, but there was no like, you can't put that doesn't make sense. It was just like, okay, explain to me what this means, and you know, why you're using it in this context. So yeah, so otherwise it was a really, like, I think I got really lucky for my first book. It was really easy and smooth, and yeah, it was awesome experience. So
The editor that we had assigned to us at Breakwater was phenomenal, just to work with, not Indigenous, but very well versed and very thoughtful. And in fact, with the second book, we've already requested special requests. Can we have the same editor from that team? That made it easy.
I would say that's probably a really important relationship for an author to have with their editor. I've never written anything, but I can imagine, you know, because you're handing over your creation to somebody, and then they're cutting little bits out of it and moving stuff around. You know, that can either be a very problematic relationship or a very good relationship, depending on how it goes.
Yeah, and if you write multiple works and you work with the same editor, then I would imagine that it becomes even easier, because you've then worked together on multiple pieces, and you don't have to ask and answer the same questions over and over again. So are there anyone else have any questions? You can put in the chat, or you can raise your hand. I'm just really happy about all of these books, because and everyone has talked about it, but just the impact that it can have on a child. And there, I see like two streams of this with children, and one is the children who will see themselves in the stories, and that is an empowering piece for them. But also all the kids in school, if it gets used in a classroom, that, you know, haven't been, K-12 curriculum hasn't ever been presented from the perspective of Indigenous peoples, right? And so if that gets used, if any of these get used more and more in schools, it's Indigenous kids, but also everyone else reading the stories and having access. There's a woman, Shawneen Pete, that some of you may know of, who works on indigenization and Indigenous education. And she, when she gives talks, she always talks about, she says that every single one of us, no matter if you're Indigenous or you're non-Indigenous, through the structures and systems of education, we've all been structurally denied opportunities to learn these stories. And so the importance of what you all are doing can't be overstated, right? Like, it's just, and I hope that everyone is going to write more and publish more, and that more classrooms will take these on and have kids reading this as a regular part of their curriculum. Would be incredible. I also want to remind people that that the awards are on June 9th. And as I said at the beginning, for those of you who may have entered later, that you can go to www.atlanticbookawards.ca, and you can access the live stream, or you can purchase tickets to the event, and see how everyone does. Do any of you have any last comments for people?
I just want to see, you know, like Native people kicking ass, but like in a like a gentle way, like a softness. Like I know that's funny. Like when I think about
Softly kicking ass.
yeah, like with humility and like respect and like, but like I just want to see that. Like so, you know, it would be an honor to lose to Jody on Thursday. Like I just like that's what I want because I think, you know, there's so much that in our histories that have tried to turn us hard. And I think we see that. I think we see our communities hard. I think we see that like toughness, right? And that like I'm an over emotional person. And for a long time, I'm like, oh, well, I must not be really good like Ilmu because you know, that I'm too chatty or I'm too emotional or, you know, the stoicism that I feel like so many of us have taken in. But I think, you know, some of that has got to be linked to this, like, you know, showing emotion meant getting hurt, getting punished, you know, something bad would happen to you. Whether it was too much joy, you laughed too much, you were crying when you were supposed to be working, whatever that may be. And I just want to see that like softness. I want to see that shell just crack off of us so that we can be this much more like, you know, ridiculously wonderful people that we can be without having to be so hard and so tough. So like, yeah, kicking ass gently is what I want to see.
I'll jump in. I just want to read everybody's stories. I want everybody every Indigenous person, everybody who has that story inside of them that wants to tell it but doesn't think they can because of where they're from or, you know, how they grew up, their education, just to tell their story, to write their story down and send it into a publisher. Just do it. And I just want to read those stories because we're funny, and those stories are always they're just the best. So put them out there so we can all love them and read them and just like celebrate each other and, you know, have those stories to share with our communities and our kids and our families. And yeah, that's what I want.
Looking at you both, and you're so much younger. I'll be 60 soon, and Chief just turned 75. And I think, you know, you've got so much time to write and keep writing. You've already found your voice, obviously, and I'm so inspired by you. I want to read your books. I haven't yet. My bad. So please, please, please keep writing. Keep putting the books out there. Putting your words out there. We need you.